Hello and welcome to Meet the Author. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Meet the Author is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation. We're a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization devoted to transforming the world individually and collectively. We invite you to visit our website at IFGT, for Institute for Global Transformation, ifgt.net. If you would like to learn more about us, there's tons of information on the website. But if you'd like to join our community, you'll find a join button in the top menu bar. And if you'd like to support our work, including programs like this, there is a donate button also in that top menu bar, and that'll take you right to PayPal. This program is being recorded and will be published on IFGT's YouTube channel. So we invite you to also subscribe to that channel. And while you're there, right next to the subscribe, there is a bell icon. And when you click that bell, that will provide you with notifications every time we post new content. We're in front of a delightfully large live audience tonight. This is wonderful how many people are here. And so that live audience is invited to submit questions. What we try to do on this program that is different from many is to give the live audience the opportunity to ask questions of our guests directly. And if you would like to, you may just type your question in the chat and I'm happy to read it. Otherwise, if you would like to come on camera and talk with our guests directly, then just type Q in the chat. And I stole that little trick from our guest. And then we'll know that you want to come on and we'll make that opportunity happen as well. Speaking of that, I'm going to bring up the chat so I'm able to see it if questions do pop up. And without further ado, then I'm going to read a brief edited version of our guest tonight is Georgia Lambert. But Georgia Lambert is an internationally acclaimed instructor who teaches numerous esoteric classes. She has over 50 years of experience in the field of esoteric studies, receiving formal training in Eastern and Western disciplines, methods, and traditions. She was the first to be licensed by the state of California to teach meditation and esoteric physiology, an experimental course she presented for 3 years at the College of Osteopathic Medicine of the Pacific, and was a key speaker at the 1985 National Cranial Conference sponsored by the American Osteopathic Association. She served for 10 years on the teaching staff of the Philosophical Research Society under Manly Palmer Hall. On George's website, this bio is posted, and if you want more of the detail, I encourage you to get there, but I'm going to cut ahead to kind of round out in terms of partially hopefully explaining why we thought she would be a fantastic guest. Specializing in the synthesis of the Western mystery tradition, she has addressed private groups in both the United States and in Britain. She is currently teaching in-depth classes to students around the world via an online audiovisual medium and has taught consistently for the last 40 years. Her classes cover a wide range of esoteric traditions and meditation techniques, including the ageless wisdom, the Kabbalah, Masonry, and the Arthurian quest for the Grail. In addition to teaching, she is currently working on several books, including a book on internal disciplines and esoteric physiology for physicians, and a completed treatise on the working dynamics of esoteric groups. In addition to teaching, she's the author of Group Dynamics, a treatise on the working dynamics of groups, and is working on several other books. So while this guest on Meet the Author isn't like the others we've had that have a book currently published that we're trying to bring to audiences and help the authors promote, Georgia has written tons. And in full disclosure, I'm currently a student in Georgia's current presentation of the Nature of the Soul class, and it has been an incredible experience so far. And I've learned a ton and continue to grow and evolve from that. And it was that exposure, as well as our IFGT president and founder, Marianne Miller, having many years of teaching with Georgia, and kind of introduced me to the fact that she's out there. And I finally woke up enough, and when she offered the class, jumped right in. So the reason that I thought she would be such a great guest tonight is that the world has obviously taken on a tremendous number of challenges, difficulties, twists and turns. And about, what was it, maybe 2 months ago now, in 1 week, we had the withdrawal in all of its chaos from Afghanistan. And that was so demanding of the media's attention that this massive earthquake in Haiti barely got any attention, but those all happened at the same time. And even with our interests and our training and our understandings, the things that are happening in the world today does at least make me continue to scratch my head and wonder what's going on. And I thought, well, there's probably no one better that I know personally that could maybe provide some perspective on what's going on and help us all out. So what I thought I'd do is I want to read part of what Georgia actually wrote in preparation for this program tonight and kind of help us set up some of the questions. Again, if folks want to ask a question, then you can either type that question in the chat or just type Q, and we'll know that you want to come on and talk with Georgia directly, and you can unmute yourself at that time. So let me read this brief intro. A time of great transition is upon us. We all know or sense it, though we call it by different names and focus upon different parts of that transition. Many cycles, historical, astrological, planetary, evolutionary, and human, are all dovetailing into one another. These cycles are producing an opportunity for humanity to advance into the next step in our spiritual and evolutionary development. So that's one way of saying, wow, lots happening, what's going on? So to start off, why don't we ask you to just speak to what are some of these cycles and how can we prepare ourselves or fit ourselves for this or these transitions?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot going on. Let me just name a couple of things. We are at a time when many different cycles do happen to be dovetailing into one another, and we're getting echoes from other times and places. First of all, we know that just watching what's unfolding on the international stage, we see echoes of patterns from the 1960s, from World War II, from the Civil War here in the United States, going back to, yes, the dreaded A word, Atlantis. We're sort of meeting the same challenges at a higher turn of the spiral to make different choices this time. But as far as some of those cycles that are dovetailing into one another, we've got the planet itself that is trying to take its next step, its initiation, if you will. Within that, you've got humanity as a kingdom in nature trying to complete its first initiation, which is the opening of the heart. You wouldn't think that's so, because all we see is the resistance. But this is the opportunity for humanity as a kingdom in nature. We see humanity moving from emotional polarization or focus to a mental polarization or focus, which is a major shift in how we meet our day-to-day challenges. And to make that mental focus receptive to the soul of humanity, something higher, not just another degree of selfishness. We have that opportunity. We're also seeing the birth of a new kingdom in nature. You know, there was a time, at least in the physicality of this planet, where only the mineral kingdom was in objective manifestation. You know, science talks about the molten seas and, you know, the volcanic activity that shaped this planet. And after the eons went by, we saw the first appearance of the vegetable kingdom, the great antediluvian burn forests and things like that. And as that progressed, after eons, we saw the beginnings of the manifestation of the animal kingdom. Finally, we see the manifestation of the human kingdom, but we're not the end. A planet, just like any other living being, has an energy body that sustains it, which has certain organs called chakras or centers. And there's 7 of them. When this planet completes its objectification, there will be 7 kingdoms in nature. They are held in potential. They're not in objective manifestation. But part of the cycle that we're in is we're nosing into the bare beginnings of the next kingdom in nature, which is the kingdom of conscious souls. Those 7 kingdoms are the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, the kingdom of conscious souls, which we are moving into and seeing the beginnings of. The next kingdom is the kingdom of adepts or masters, those of humanity that have reached their spiritual adulthood and are staying around to aid the evolution of this planet. And finally, the kingdom of the planetary consciousness itself. So a major shift that we're undergoing is the birth of this new kingdom, which of course is going to mean a great identity crisis for humanity. We're also seeing the shift from the age of the 6th ray to the age of the 7th ray. If you're not familiar with that vocabulary, the age of the 6th ray, which is the last 2,500 years, the focus was on reaching upward toward divinity. It was a movement from matter upward towards spirit, the reaching up for those higher ideals of justice and beauty and purity and divinity and all those good things. The drawback to that is that as the focus was placed upon reaching up to that divinity, it made us see matter as the enemy. And that's caused some problems that we're seeing unfolding today. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But we're shifting from that 6th ray energy of the movement of matter upward towards spirit to the age of the 7th ray, which is spirit back into matter. In the Lord's Prayer, that phrase, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." That's a 7th ray phrase. So that divinity that has been reached, if not fully embodied, at least we have the idea of rightness and brotherhood and things to strive for. Well, 7th ray means that now it's time to make that stuff practical down here. And if that wasn't enough, we've got the shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, this shift from a water sign into an air sign, from, again, an emotional focus into a more mental and spiritual focus. So all of these things are dovetailing into one another at the same time. And what we're seeing on the world stage is the resistance to all of that. Remember Newton's laws of motion. Matter once in motion tends to remain in that motion until it's acted upon by some stronger outside force. And we're seeing the resistance of the old crystallized forms, whether they be political or philosophical or religious or economic. We're seeing the battling of those old crystallized forms for their existence. Their will to survive is what we're seeing on the world stage. What we don't see is the incoming new activity that hasn't taken form yet, but like a tooth that pushes out the baby teeth, and we only see the pain and wobbliness of the baby teeth. We don't see what's causing that. What we're seeing today is this new stage, this new opportunity on so many levels pressing downward, and we're seeing all of the resistance to that.
And so it sounds like all of this has been foretold. Is that accurate?
Well, some of it is predictable in terms of how the cycles fit into one another. For instance, astrologically, we know the age of Taurus gave way to the age of Aries, and the age of Aries gave way to Pisces, and Pisces is giving way to Aquarius. So those kinds of things can be predicted. We also know that we're shifting from the sixth ray into the seventh ray. But what humanity is going to do about that and how we go through that transition is still up for grabs because of humanity's choice, humanity's free will. It's the question I've said in class that, the baby's going to be born, whether the mother's in a field or in the hospital and well prepared. So how well prepared we are is going to mitigate a lot of the collateral damage that usually happens when we change from an age to another age. We've seen minor changes where we have periods of dark ages or dim ages, if they're not altogether dark. And then in the really big cycles, like between root races, between the Atlantean period and this one, we see a restructuring of the planet itself. Now, in esoteric tradition, we've been told that this time we don't have to do it that way, that it doesn't mean that this is going to be completely smooth, but it does mean that we don't have to have that break in consciousness and in our history that usually happens between ages, that we can maintain a sort of continuity of consciousness from one age to the next. It's sort of like maintaining a continuity of consciousness from one lifetime to another.
So let's keep going with that a little bit, because one of the things we try to do on this program is emphasize one of IFGT's main efforts, which is to facilitate as best we can what is often referred to as the tipping point, that at some point a critical mass of people will accept or change or do something that all of a sudden then it will become just kind of the norm. And defining what that norm is, et cetera, is a little more complicated. But it sounds like you're talking about a situation that this will happen one way or the other. The amount of difficulty in that process is part of what will happen. But when that does happen, we will continue that connection to consciousness is what I think I heard you say.
Yeah, but we can make it happen quicker or drag it out forever.
Can you give
that's our
how that would happen?
That's our choice. It's said esoterically that the third initiation, which the planet is undergoing, has to do with a choice of the right-hand path or traditionally the left-hand path. And humanity is at that particular point of choice on a lower turn of the spiral. We're at that forked path of decision, that we're moving into the age of the seventh ray, which is the energy of will into form, spirit into matter. Now, whether we make that our own separative will into matter, or we align with divine will and become carriers for that divine will into matter, that's a matter of choice. And this is why there are so many spiritually oriented people in incarnation right now. It's like, this is the happening place to be. Normally, there's not this many disciples and probationers and aspirants and seekers in the world. But in order to help humanity make the right choice, there are great numbers in incarnation around the world, quietly working in all areas of human activity, not just in religion and philosophy, like in the last age, but moving into those areas that spiritual people didn't work in the last age. The focus was upward toward divinity, and so religion and philosophy were the only paths open to spiritual seekers, which left, of course, science and business and politics open to those that would misuse them. And of course, that's exactly what happened. So today, the spiritual focus is moving back into a lot of these areas to reclaim them in harmony with the greater plan of the planet. Now, what that tipping point is, what that 100th monkey equation is, nobody knows. And you never know, if, one little person out in Sandusky, Ohio is going to go into meditation and that will do it. And so we all have a voice. We all have a part to play in this amazing time we've all chosen to incarnate into.
When we were preparing for this, one of the questions that you drafted off of the mess I sent you was, so what will tip the balance and change the way in which we grow from suffering and pain to one of learning through joy?
That's a pretty complex subject. However, remember that we're not talking about numbers. When we're talking about choice, we're talking about affecting or impressing the magnetic field that contains us all. That magnetic field that supports thought forms and feeling forms and forms of activity. And so in the impressing of that field, we're not necessarily talking numbers. We're talking strength and clarity, the clear, precise thought of someone trained in, let's say, meditation or just the process of thinking carries more weight in the field than the vague, fuzzy, ambiguous focus of the average individual. So it's not a question of numbers. An illustration I always like to use is, if you could imagine, all of us here tonight in a big field somewhere, and we're all holding a sheet and we're holding it really tightly. And another person takes a marble and throws it onto that sheet. What's going to happen? That marble's just going to hit the sheet and bounce off. But if that person lobs a bowling ball on that sheet, it produces a divot in the field. And so the marble, then following the bowling ball, is going to hit that curve that's created by the bowling ball and spiral down into the center. So when we create a pure focused thought, we're putting a divot in the field, in the space-time continuum. And so that tipping point, again, is not dependent on numbers. It's dependent upon strength and quality. And that's why trained thinkers and trained meditators are so vital at this time in this transition period.
I want to go to a question that will relate in terms then of service, but one of our audience members asked before, you made a reference to a term that they would like a little explanation with, the left and right hand paths.
The left and right hand paths are terms from the Middle Ages, the esoteric lineages of the Middle Ages. And basically, it has to do with in alignment with the planetary plan or not. In other words, does humanity focus its will and create its own reality? And by the way, there are techniques out there that, yes, we can create our own reality. But if the reality that we create is not in harmony with the greater reality in which we live, that lovely law of karma is going to eventually come around and teach us what not to do. So recognize that as we go forward here, we have a choice, and that choice is to keep our separative will in place and choose the path of separateness, which is the left-hand path, or open up to this greater life in which we live and become a co-creating part of it, so that our little will is not thrown away. It's not, gotten rid of. It becomes the vessel or the carrier wave for the divine will. We become the hands and feet of the soul, the grail chalice of the soul. And that's the right-hand path.
Would you say, with your knowledge, training, wisdom, that the symptoms of climate change are a manifestation of a reality, a disharmonic reality that was created?
Not necessarily. In the Alice Bailey books, DK says that in the future, this planet's natural environment will be a lot more tropical. And so we're at this weird time when humanity is not only making transitions, but the other kingdoms in nature are too. We're moving into a time when a lot of species of animals will naturally go extinct. There are those that we're helping way prematurely, certainly, but it's also a part of a natural cycle. Remember that the animal kingdom, as a kingdom of consciousness, has to upgrade its form too as it grows. Otherwise, we'd still have dinosaurs running around. So the animal kingdom, is moving into its next step because the whole chain of life on the planet is moving up a notch. It's not just humanity. And so it's affecting everything. We know, for instance, that the warming that's taking place on this planet is not unique. Other planets in our solar system are also warming, and they're not quite sure why that is. Esoterically, we know it has to do with the relationship of things going on within our sun, which is the heart chakra of our solar system. We know that the natural hum of the earth, which is called the Schumann Resonance, is going up, and they can't really explain why that is. In the time of ancient Greece, they would build their healing temples over certain ley lines or power points where the hum of the earth was very strong. And the architecture of the temple and the colors used and the music used and the incense used all conspired to augment that particular hum, because they believed that if your organs were in tune with the natural hum of the planet, you would be healthy. Well, yeah, except that now we're living in a time when the natural hum is not stable. It's going up, and our energy bodies are kind of scrambling to try to keep up with everything. So we're in this very unstable time, but that's not a bad thing. Some of you in class will groan when I say this, but here comes my refrigerator theory. The hardest part of moving a refrigerator is getting it unstuck from the floor. Once you've unstuck it, then it can be nudged in any particular direction. So in this time when all of these forms are being thrown up and in chaos and there's all kinds of uncertainty, this is the time when the new good stuff can be easily incorporated. This is the time when we can do the nudging that we need to do in order to help this planet move into its next phase of development without humanity prolonging the difficulty.
Well, I know I will get back to the question I was going to ask before. I wanted to refer the question that was in the chat, but since you've brought up this point, it sounds like something that I've heard many discuss, and I guess it's struck a note with me because I am still struggling with it myself. And part of the idea is that despite what we know, we also are still human and are going to continue to have the human experience. And so
Sure.
There's only so much protection, if you will, our intellect can provide. I think we still have to have this human experience. And so what are your thoughts on how to stay above the fray, the 3D fray, if you will, of getting sucked into what some might call a negative or low frequency energy, the fear, the concern, the worry, the anxiety, those things? Thoughts on how we can ride the wave, as some people say?
A couple of things. First of all, as many of you have heard me say in my classes, two weapons that have been used since time out of mind to keep the population in control are guilt and fear. Politics has used these weapons. Religions has used these weapons. Fear is a negative attachment to the future. Guilt is a negative attachment to the past, and both paralyze you in the present moment. And so all of this fear that we see being stirred up is designed to keep us from moving ahead and making choices. Recognize that we've got to shift fear into hope, which is a positive attachment to the future. And we have to shift guilt into compassion and understanding for our actions at the time, because that's where our consciousness was at that moment. It doesn't have to be the choice that we make now. So that's one thing. Also recognize that fear and instability and anxiety are all properties of the form. The soul is immortal. The soul doesn't need the will to survive. It's immortal. The will to survive on any level, mental, emotional, or physical, comes from the form. And if we can remember that, that helps us stay a little bit above the fray. The other thing is, and many of you have heard me say this before, we need to take a breath, whether that be prayer or meditation. The example I always use is, when we look at dolphins or whales, they live their life in the water. They mate in the water, they eat in the water, they have their social interactions in the water, but they're really creatures of air, and they have to come up for a breath from time to time in order to survive. We as human beings are creatures of a higher level of spirit, of soul. Yet we live in what the Hindus call the three lower worlds, the world of mental form, emotional form, and physical form. And in order to survive and have the strength to survive, we have to reach up and take a breath every once in a while. And this is why meditation and prayer and alignment with that which is above the fray, that which is incoming, the new next step, is so important. And that helps us keep our balance.
I'm wondering about what your thoughts would be about this. So roughly 3 years ago, my return to the path really kicked in to high gear, and it's been unfolding rapidly ever since. And one of the insights that came to me was, the more I immersed myself, the more I would get familiar and used to things, and it wouldn't seem so strange and counter to the world of material science that I had been oriented to prior to this. And so would you concur adding that to the list that you just shared, that
Oh, sure.
by spending more time in that environment and less drowning in the news and whatnot, is that something you would suggest?
Yeah, but remember, we're moving into the age of the seventh ray. So those ideals that we reach for have to be practically applied. So we can still look at the news and all the stuff that's going on, but see it from a different perspective. For instance, again, one of the examples I use in my classes is, can you imagine a college that looks outwardly the same as all of our colleges do, and that teaches the same subjects that all of our colleges do, but they teach the esoteric heart of it. They teach sacred geometry and esoteric mathematics. They teach history from the angle of the karma between nations and why certain nations are allies or enemies at any particular cycle in time. They teach the arts, which came out of the Greek mysteries, they're the handmaidens of the mysteries, to teach the esoteric heart of all the subjects that we currently have, but from an esoteric perspective. So we learn to teach ourselves to look at the news from the place of the observer without getting caught up in it, but not running away from it or being afraid to look at it. We need to look at it because we need to know what's going on in the world. We can't approach this transition with rose-colored glasses because there's stuff we have to deal with. But we can deal with it from a spiritual perspective, from the angle of the soul, that there are bigger things going on. And, you know, I started out tonight talking about an initiation that our planet is going through. And I can't go into all the details in this sort of format, but one of the things that our planet is facing right now is that what we see on the world stage is really not the true present moment. It's our past manifesting in the present moment. There's a certain stage at initiation where, as the soul descends into its instrumentality, to claim that instrumentality and merge with it in that alchemical or divine marriage, the persona must come up to meet it. And that persona is not just the present lifetime. It's the totality of all the lifetimes you've ever had. And so it is with the planet. And so what we're seeing on the world stage is every level of consciousness that humanity has ever expressed, and the chaos of all of these literally different time periods and cycles manifesting together. But this is that matter raising up to receive the impress of the soul. And that's what we have to focus on, bringing that down and applying it to what's going on here.
That's fascinating. And it reminded me of similar comments that a prior guest on this program, Dr. Ervin Laszlo, made, and how there's some, and as you have mentioned in the class and maybe in this interview as well, that there are the common themes cross all of the traditions and the major philosophies, that the language used, et cetera, may change to fit the culture and the audience, but the principles and the meat of the discussion are the same across. And so not surprised that Dr. Laszlo would find something related to the Akashic field that might have a similar resonance. So
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you've heard me say this in class that, you know, if we're all trying to climb the mountaintop with truth and spirituality at the very top, we all start from a different point at the base of the mountain. You know, on one side, it might be sunny. On another side, it might be a completely different environment, but we all start in our own place, from our own village. And as we climb, we not only get closer to the truth at the top, we also get closer to each other. And at a certain place on the path, we recognize that with all the different esoteric lineages, it's all the same story. Different lineages have different points of the path or different points of emphasis, but it's like they're all pieces of the same medallion, and it's time to put the medallion back together now.
I want to remind the audience that if they would like to ask a question, to please either type it into the chat or just type the letter Q, and that'll be an indication that you'd like to ask your question directly with Georgia. So circling back a little bit, this idea of both how we can facilitate a tipping point, but also how we can maybe stay above the fray while not isolating ourselves and walling ourselves off from consuming current events, but doing so from a different vantage point, from a different part of ourselves, perhaps. The question about how can we be of service, and I think I would go ahead and hazard a guess on the exam, but since we want to hear what your thoughts, how would you suggest that we could be of service in this time of so much outer chaos?
Well, as I mentioned before, the first thing is you need to take a breath.
Right.
You know,
that would have been my answer on the test.
You know, there's really 3 different categories of meditation work, and they're all important, but they're different. The first category is what I call meditation for communion. This is the kind of meditation where you just reach upward for that higher life and you hang out in it, you commune with it. It's for your own sustenance and your own nurture. There's another kind of meditation where you learn things. You connect with that rain cloud of knowable things, as the Hindus say. And at the beginning of each age, there is a new rain cloud of knowable things that contains all the wisdom to be unfolded within humanity during a particular age. There's a kind of meditation where you link up to that, and rather than going to the library out here, you pull that in and give it new form in terms of thought and feeling and action. And so there's that sort of learning meditation. There's also the third category, which is meditation for service. This is the kind of meditation you do for someone else's behalf. Adjustments for negativity, healing work, clarification of situations, bringing in the wisdom in the heart of certain negative situations. And at a certain place on the path, you begin to experience a little bit of all three of those types of meditation. But the one that really addresses what you were asking, Ken, is this first one. To first of all, make sure that we align ourselves on a regular basis, that we are stable, that our thought is clear. If our thought is clear, then we're making more of a dent in that space-time continuum, in that magnetic field that supports the mental circulation of humanity and the emotional circulation of humanity and the physical activity of humanity. Again, with the idea of not just reaching for, spiritual pie in the sky, but to reach for that for the purpose of applying it down here. Remember that each of us is like a bead on the rosary chain. We are receptive to that which is ahead of us, but our obligation is to radiate and give in service to those directly behind us. And as we do, we are sounding our voice spiritually. We are making our mark in helping humanity make those choices.
In trying to develop my own level and skills of discernment, one thing that's become clear is when the same information comes from multiple sources, it's probably more reliable than something that you just hear once that doesn't quite strike you right. And
yeah,
you have just supported what many of our other guests on this program have said. And it may be a little counterintuitive to some to think that simply by faithfully practicing meditation and developing your skills the way could be serving others. But that's exactly what you and others are saying. And I think those.
Yeah, let me add to that at the end of whatever meditation work you're doing, be sure to not keep the energies of the meditation in-house. At the end of every meditation, the last act you should do before you move out of the meditation is to radiate that out, whatever realizations you've achieved, whatever energy you've experienced, radiate it out into humanity, pass it on, because this is affecting the field.
How can we, actually got a couple of questions, so let me read Sandra's that just jumped to me, excuse me. How do you think artists will be positioned in the dawning of this planetary evolution? And our advertisements did feature the fact that among her many, many talents, George is also an artist. And so I think the Sandra asking this question, also an artist, so be interested in your answer.
Well, the arts are, as I said before, our view of how we approach the arts come out of the Greek mystery schools. They're the handmaidens of the mysteries. And, as we grow and develop, energy moves from lower chakras into higher chakras. And there's a stage on the path where a certain degree of energy moves from our procreative center, the sacral center, to the creative center, the throat center. The throat center is being activated within humanity. As humanity begins to make that shift from emotional focus into mental focus, the throat center of humanity is being stimulated. Now, the throat center has two sides. It's like the two hemispheres of the brain. One side, sort of the left brain side of the throat center, is the intellect, the concrete mind, which is not necessarily spiritually focused. The other side of the throat center is the creative artist, whether that be through painting or music or dance or cooking or creative finance or whatever it is. That's sort of the other side, the sort of right brain side of the throat center. So as humanity brings the throat center more and more online, we're going to see the scientific field and the field of the arts really be major conduits for the new stuff that's coming in. I mean, science and the arts have always been on the cutting edge. You know, when this new energy of this age that we're nosing into started circling around in the late 1800s, that's when, you know, authors started to write about time travel, you know, and going to the moon and things like that. And in the field of painting, people were saying, well, what does light look like when it's painted? How about if I do a portrait not based on our eyes, which can see only from one perspective only, but what would something look like if we could see it from all perspectives at the same time? What would that look like? So we've always seen, you know, the sciences and the arts at the cutting edge of things. And as far as the sciences go, it used to be until pretty recently that the cutting edge of thought was in the esoteric field. No longer. The new physics that's talking about other dimensions and going beyond time and, you know, string theory and all of that kind of stuff. The cutting edge of thought these days is really within the new physics. And the arts are going to mirror that. So the arts have always had a big role, and that will certainly continue.
And you've reminded me that answer when you were talking about what university educations might look like in the future, it reminded me of, we may not know exactly when that last person creates the tipping point, but we'll know when we see it. And those are two examples of, I think, of what it will look like after we've kind of reached that point. And
part of it is not only will we know it when we see it, we'll help make it happen. Mm-hmm. We're not just going to wait for other people to do it. We're going to be part of that pioneering force.
Right. Have another question from Christy. She says, how can we engage in a way that comes from a higher place with people whose focus is challenging to us?
Well, that's always the caveat, isn't it? Yeah, right. What I say in my classes is that, you know, it would be wonderful if we had a magic wand and we could wave it and everybody would get along with everybody else. You know, Blavatsky says that the greatest sin to be overcome is the sin of separateness. Esoterically, this is the big lesson we have to learn here as part of Earth's humanity. If we didn't have gender and ethnicity and nationality and religion to separate us, we would invent things to separate us. And you're always going to have to deal with people whose personas are less than lovely, you know? Remember that at the heart of that nasty personality in front of you is a soul who's having just as hard a time with that nasty personality as you are. And the soul is always your ally. It doesn't mean you condone the behavior, but you understand it. You understand that there is a consciousness trying to work its way out. And for whatever reason, it's chosen some very difficult circumstances to do that. And so you take that particular attitude, and that leaves you free to work with any and everyone. It doesn't mean that you are going to love that persona or anything that persona does, but it does give you that basis of understanding.
It's been very helpful to me when we got to that point in the class, because we're as a new person to it and trying to radiate that love at the end of the meditation towards so-called enemies. That's not an easy thing, but when you hear it in the context you just presented, it makes a lot more sense, and that flow became much easier as well.
And a lot of that negativity, comes out of fear and ignorance. Sure. And sometimes, especially with our relatives, it's of course much easier to deal with nasty people that aren't part of our family. Our family help create all of our hot buttons, and they know where all of them are, don't they? So it's much more difficult to deal with people that are close to us. But again, if we can recognize that, much of the behavior comes out of fear or ignorance. And the other thing is we have to learn to forgive other people for being younger brothers. And that often includes our parents. They are doing the best they can with the consciousness that they are expressing. And we have to forgive them for not being more than they are at that particular moment.
I want to keep track of the time, but a couple of people just type Q. So let's see if we can get to both of these questions. Suzanne Taylor, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
So, it's so nice to listen to you, Georgia. It's been a long time, and you're so smart. You're so knowledgeable and so intelligent and attractive. And what can I say? But what I wanted to say about our subject here, you've said something that really I was so happy to hear it. It made such sense to me. I'm here on this call because the mailing from this organization was sent out by the Scientific and Medical Network. And I know you spoke there, Georgia, decades ago. I checked in there. I said, don't you know Georgia, who's on this program you sent out? So anyway,
in London. In
London, yes, they are absolutely the place where we have these kind of conversations. Most places you're just an audience and you can, ask a question, not make a comment or whatever. But to have people who are sophisticated talking to each other as well as listening to it, a presenter, it's the best place I've found, and maybe now I have another place. But what you said that I really like so much relates to just this last week. We were on one of the Scientific and Medical Network conversations. It wasn't so much a presenter, that it was just all of us talking, and we had a subject, and I can't even remember how they phrased it. It doesn't matter. But what almost everyone, and there were maybe 50 people on the call, almost everyone said they don't listen to the news. And I have the news on all the time. And you can't do that. It brings you down, I was so happy to hear what you said about you have to know what's happening, because that's the grist that you work with to evolve yourself.
You can't fix what you don't see.
So Georgia, I thank you so much for that. That was really, I can't wait to bring that back to them.
I think there is a way
we can't walk around in a white light bubble. That's not participating in the human experience. As the heart chakra opens, we have a stronger connection to the human family, not a withdrawal from the human family. And it's our job to move into that human family and fix the stuff that we see.
Well, but come up for a breath of air too.
Yeah. But that breath of air gives us the strength to deal with the crud that's in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to say one more thing, which is just in the grand scheme of things. My vote is all that's happening with all of humanity is that we're evolving ourselves to tune into the sacred, to become one with union with whatever the great force, whatever it is. And that all of the stuff we're doing is what gives us the material to work with. That we, this is the stuff that we have to straighten out and get better at and understand and learn and whatever. But that's just the secondary story. Or the real story is that this whole giant, energetic is moving, and that's what it moves with. So, but then I'm so glad you said that about the news, because I hadn't quite put it together that way. So,
and another angle on that is, this is how we master our own matter. When we use the term adept or master, adept at what? Master of what? We don't master our matter by abandoning it and refusing to deal with it. We master our matter by fixing it and recreating it in alignment with the divine plan.
beautiful.
And if you're wondering what to call that thing that we all are searching for a name for, some are comfortable with God, others come up with other names. Among George's gifts given is the best name I've heard yet, and love it. So
Should we say it together? Should we say it together?
Sure, let's go for it. Great.
Oh, no.
Oh, not that one? You want to share it?
Well,
George?
mine is the one about whom naught can be said.
No, this
Well,
one-
that's the official name in
Right.
the
I
eliminated.
got that one from you, so.
No, I call it the Great Cosmic Biggie.
Oh, that's newer than my years with you.
Love that one. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay, Diane Collins, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. First of all, I have to say to Georgia and Suzanne, I was going to say the exact thing that you just said, to acknowledge. And I was so happy to hear you say that, because like you, Suzanne, so many people I talk or listen to, even, the wisdom teachers on YouTube or whatever, talking about don't watch TV, don't watch Netflix, and so I was really gratified to hear you say that, Georgia. And also, I really, of course, resonate that it's quality of consciousness, not the numbers. And I really appreciate that you're teaching that. My question is, but you hear your thoughts, Georgia, on are the children being born today, and we've all know about the term of indigo children or rainbow children or whatever, but is it so, according to your knowledge and wisdom, that children born today are born of a more enlightened, higher consciousness?
Well, we're seeing that more and more, aren't we? And that's part of us nosing into that next level. What I started with tonight is all these different cycles that are dovetailing into one another. Another thing that's happening is that our perception of reality as a species is expanding. Scientifically, they know that in the past, dim, dark past, we couldn't see all the colors that we can see today. We couldn't hear all the musical notes that we can hear today. Our range, if we imagine a piano keyboard, the range of our perception, not just our physical senses, but our emotional and mental senses, are extending. And so it's not extrasensory perception, it's extended sensory perception. And part of what this next age will unfold is humanity will nose into that next level of reality. In esoteric tradition, our physical plane has 7 layers or levels. Our reality is only the bottom 3, solids, liquids, and gases. This is what science knows about. But that next one up, called the 4th etheric, is what we're nosing into. And this means an understanding of that network of light, that Curlian structure that underlies and supports all form, that connects everything to everything else. It's said that as we move into this next age, humanity will eventually become telepathic. And so we're seeing the beginnings of this in many of our children. And also, and I could be wrong about this, but my intuition tells me that one of the rises of autism in children is this increased sensitivity. Their instrument is so darn sensitive that living in this world is painful. Other people, other thought forms and feeling forms bombarding them all the time is painful, so they withdraw. But they are really pioneering a new sensitivity that will be part of the norm in this next age. You know, when a new trait comes into humanity, at first, the people that have it are considered really weird. And then it becomes normal and most people have it. And finally, the people that don't have it are considered weird. So what we're seeing in our children in all kinds of different manifestations is kind of nosing into this next level of life and perception as we add that layer of existence to our reality.
That makes total sense. And I really appreciate, we could go on, but I know we have to close this wonderful session. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
I've been feeling this compelled that to take this another step further beyond Zoom, because we've come into this age of Zoom gatherings, to actual community. Do you see a need or importance for there to be a rise of communes? I mean, I came from the days of hippies.
I was from that time, but I avoided all of it because I was living in Europe.
So I'm just wondering, because I'm just feeling this really strong spiritual urge that we should be coming together, taking this another step beyond the electronic gathering on Zoom and actually living together collectively. Do you see that as an important step towards this ascension process we're in?
I don't know if it's an important step, but it's part of the process. I think that part of what we're nosing into is that we're on many levels redefining community, and finding new forms of interacting with one another. You know, part of the whole electronic thing has freed humanity from living in physical dents, because now we can commune with people on the other side of the planet instantaneously. And it's created an integration that has never happened within humanity before. But again, things move from subtle to dense. And so what happens on subtle levels eventually has to roll itself down into physical manifestation. So we'll see more and more people choosing different ways to live together and interact. And that would certainly be a part of it.
This has been wonderful. This has been, there are always more than I had hoped for. This one, certainly so. And I was going to mention just very briefly, because Suzanne had brought up the scientific and medical community that you had spoken with. Unfortunately, that was one part I left out of the bio that I read, but it is in your bio. But we, the IFGT, had the opportunity to interview David Lorimer.
Great.
That interview is on our YouTube channel for those who might be interested in seeing that. He's wonderful, very graciously invited us to affiliate, and it sounds like that was productive for us. If they sent the word out to their network, we're very appreciative.
Oh, super.
I just want to say something else I think you left out of the bio, unless I was distracted. For those of you, I don't know if you all know Georgia, so you'd all know this if you know her, but if anybody's on this call who doesn't know Georgia, she is a brilliant artist in many different, she paints, she embroiders, she cooks, she made, I went to her house for dinner, she made the butter. So I'm telling you,
and she cut it with her broadsword. So
yeah,
yes,
right.
I have some. I have some very strange hobbies, and one of them was working out with chainmail and a broadsword. Not in this last decade, but in days gone by.
Too. You had falcons.
And falconry, yes.
Or,
Yeah.
but anyway, on her website, you'll see an array of her beautiful artwork. And do yourselves a favor and go take a look.
And she plays
Thank
the
you, sis.
harp.
And it was, I have to say, it's wonderful to see so many faces I haven't seen in forever and to see so many wonderful new faces. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, well,
Georgia?
our delight, and I don't want to wear out our welcome, but it seems there's such a strong interest and such a thirst for the knowledge and wisdom you can share. We may just have to extend the invitation again, and hopefully you'll accept.
Sure.
Georgia, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you so very much, because your words of wisdom right now are so needed and so appreciated. I think so many of us in this community are really going through some difficult times trying to figure out what's the best path forward for us individually and for us as a community. And your words of wisdom tonight, I think, really rang the bell. And I think we all have new information to take with us in our movement forward. So thank you so very much.
Oh, truly my pleasure. Thank you guys so much for letting me do this.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ken.
Yes.
Thanks,
thank you,
Marianne.
Georgia. We'll
I'm
see
going to
you.
go feed my puppy.
Sounds good.
He's half Great Dane, so he's pretty insistent when it's time for his food.
Make sure that half gets fed.
Yeah. The other half is poodle. Don't even ask.
I think we've reached the tipping point. That's what's being created now. All right.
Thank you,
I'm gonna
Georgia.
Okay, everyone.
Good night,
Peace.
everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.